Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Megan Easley-Walsh, and this is History Stories. With a PhD in history, as an author, a writing consultant, and editor, my life is full of history and stories. With that in mind, this podcast's goal is to explore some of those stories of history. This will include diving into antiques and interesting historical artifacts that I've found, looking behind the scenes at inspiration for my novels, taking a peek at places I visited, and uncovering new topics of interest. Thank you for joining me. Let's begin. This episode marks the 10th episode of History Stories. For Season 1, each episode has been dedicated to a different historical novel of mine. Along the way, we've spent time with the French Resistance, drank tea in Victorian London, galloped on horses across the American West, sailed the high seas in 1774, explored medieval manuscripts, forged art in Switzerland, talked about the International Prime Meridian Conference, and more. For this 10th episode, we'll be looking at my 10th historical novel. On my bookshelves, I have a large bound black book. I found this book a few years ago at an antiques fair. Inside are beautiful, colorful maps. This book is an atlas, and it dates from around the year 1922. It is precisely the type of book that my characters in Where Fortune Leads might have used to traverse the globe. Where Fortune Leads is set in 1922, and follows two brothers who are a photographer and an archaeologist. Here's a bit about it. When Charles Treacher, archaeologist, presents his brother Arthur, a photographer, with the gift of a fortune cookie for his birthday, a course of action is set into motion that neither could have predicted. In the summer of 1922, Charles is the one who is accustomed to adventures, following in the footsteps of their father, Joseph Treacher. Arthur is content with his life in his childhood home in upstate New York, seeking out the perfect subjects for his photographs. Just as a fortune cookie crumbles, so too do Arthur's plans. When Charles's business partner goes missing, the Treachers hire detectives Eva Grant and her uncle Clarence, and a round-the-world caper begins. As each person becomes a target, the race is on to save the Treachers' legacy, and also the Treachers. The Roaring Twenties were a particularly interesting time to write about. In Egypt, discoveries of ancient tombs, such as Howard Carter finding Tutankhamun's, captivated the interest of the world. In fact, did you know that the craze of dark eyeliner was inspired by Egyptian mummies and paintings in the discoveries of this time? Prohibition, jazz, and the increasing presence of cars led to a distinctive era to write about. And in Italy, Mussolini and his fascists were just coming into power. What sets Arthur on his journey is a fortune cookie. Fortune cookies are often associated with Chinese cooking because of their presence at Chinese restaurants, particularly in the United States. But did you know that fortune cookies were actually invented in California? According to History.com's website, it is likely that fortune cookies were actually invented by Japanese immigrants that had arrived in California after the Chinese Exclusionary Act. The Chinese Exclusionary Act was signed into law on May 6, 1882. Although President Chester A. Arthur vetoed the bill and continued to oppose it, he eventually had to sign it into law. President Arthur was the same president who invited the countries of the world to the American shores in the 1884 International Prime Meridian Conference that we discussed in Episode 3, related to my novel Meridian and my doctoral thesis. In fact, the railways that played such an important part in influencing the outcome of the Meridian Conference were also directly related to many of the Chinese immigrants that came to the U.S. Beginning with the California Gold Rush and continuing through the building of transcontinental railways, Chinese workers grew in numbers. By the time of the Chinese Exclusionary Act, tolerance had begun to disappear. It is a sad reality that has repeated itself more than once in history. One example is what we spoke about in the last episode when talking about degenerate art under Nazism. One group is identified as the other. A ban is sought against them. This is a sad historical replication that has taken place throughout time across many places. Just as growing opposition to Chinese workers developed in the latter part of the 19th century, growing nationalistic ideas began to increasingly pulse through Europe after World War I. As mentioned earlier in this episode, in 1922, Mussolini took office in Italy. In nearby Germany, Nazism had not yet taken root. But the German economy was tumultuous after the First World War. Hyperinflation sank into the economy, inflating prices and causing the use of paper bills marked in the millions. At a recent antiques fair, I was able to find German marks recording this rapid inflation. In 1922, prices began to rise, reaching a peak in 1923, before stabilizing in 1924. The reasons behind the hyperinflation are largely attributed to reparations for the First World War that Germany was forced to shoulder under the 1919 Treaty of Versailles. I have a bill dated from the 7th of July, 1922 for 500 marks. The bill from the 9th of August, 1923 that I have is for 2 million marks. Under restructured money, this time the Reichsmarks, the bill I have dated the 11th of October, 1924 is for 50 Reichsmarks. This trio shows a snapshot in time as German currency and the economy underwent dynamic change. In my novel, Where Fortune Leads, the characters take note of these changes as they read the newspapers and travel across the world. I hope that you have enjoyed your travels with me through this first season of History Stories. In the words of the author Victor Hugo, quote, "What is history? An echo of the past in the future, a reflex from the future on the past," end quote. May our past inform our understanding to help us create a brighter future. Thank you for joining me for this episode of History Stories. To find out more about my writing and my research, visit me at meganeasley-walsh.com. And you can find my novel, Where Fortune Leads, on Amazon. I look forward to sharing more history stories with you in future episodes.